Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bowinn, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. So glad to be with all of you here today on the territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. I am pleased to be able to be your MC host for today's very important, exciting announcement. Now, when it comes to climate change, I think we all recognize that the climate crisis is here. Climate change is no longer something that we can talk about or afford to think about as something that is far off in the future for our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren to deal with. Instead, it is right here. And we are seeing that British Columbia is experiencing significant impacts already. We need to be ready. And that means understanding the hazards, the risks, what is ahead of us, and working with communities to get the work that needs to happen done now. And so I'd like to welcome up to the podium Premier David Eby, who will provide us with the announcement today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bowinn, and good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. And we are on the territory of Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. Wherever I go in BC, people tell me about how proud they are to be British Columbians and how grateful they are to live in British Columbia. We have ocean and mountains and lakes and forests. It's truly a magnificent place to be. We all share a connection to the natural world that's around us, and it's a rare British Columbian that doesn't feel that connection. It's also why we need to protect it. About 3 years ago, I was with Kaylee and our family at her dad's cabin, and there was a forest fire across the water. At night, we could literally watch the trees burn and explode, literally explode because of the heat from the fire. It's in a relatively remote part of BC, and we knew that fire crews in that record-breaking fire season were busy elsewhere. And it forced us to consider what it would mean if we lost the cabin, if her family lost the cabin and all those memories due to forest fire. That's an increasing reality for many British Columbians as we see firsthand the disproportionate impacts, frankly, of climate change here in British Columbia. For far too long, governments did not place sufficient importance on protecting British Columbia from the impacts of climate change. And there was a false choice that was forced on British Columbians. We could grow the economy or we could protect the environment. And over the last 5 years, we've proven that that is in fact a false choice. We have to grow the economy and act on climate change. We've implemented North America's most ambitious climate plan. We're making investments in mass timber, adding value to every single tree that is harvested. We're eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. We're taking action to protect species at risk. We're protecting unique habitats like the Nkamaplu Valley in southeast BC, now one of the largest protected areas established in BC in a decade. We're working with First Nations to preserve the oldest and rarest forests in British Columbia, and we've done all of that while leading Canada's recovery and creating good new jobs in clean tech, low carbon energy, and so much more. Still, the last few years have taught us a harsh lesson in the impacts of climate change. British Columbians have endured floods and droughts, an unprecedented heat dome, record seasons of forest fires, atmospheric rivers. I'm reminded of the human impact of all this when I speak with residents from Lytton, residents from Abbotsford, who have seen their communities dramatically hurt by these climate disasters. It's a very rare British Columbian that hasn't seen or felt the consequences in their lives, in their pocketbooks, or in our natural environment. These climate disasters are becoming more frequent, and they're increasing in severity as climate change persists. That's why we created the new Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. And that's why I asked my good friend, Bowinn, a licensed professional engineer, to be minister. She's handling this critical work with exceptional dedication. Today, we're taking 2 key steps to better protect BC's communities, infrastructure, and our economy. So British Columbia is both climate ready and climate resilient. First, we're investing an additional $180 million in the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. This will nearly double our investment in the fund to support both First Nations and local governments, as we all work together to better prepare communities before disaster strikes. These funds will assist in the planning of evacuation routes, as well as in flood mitigation infrastructure like dikes. It will aid emergency operations centers and provide equipment and training for volunteer fire departments. This is part of our work to pay off deficits in critical infrastructure using this year's significant surplus. Second, we're launching Climate Ready BC. a one-stop online platform. It provides tools and resources to help communities prepare for climate emergencies and natural disasters. It provides risk data, as well as hazard and mapping tools, and funding opportunities for communities to access resources to mitigate disaster risks. Take floods, for example. The online hub pulls in information like where floods have recently and historically occurred. It includes the main cause of the flooding, but also provides current tools like tools to report debris caused by flooding. I encourage everyone to take a look at the website. Knowing the risks and being prepared will help our communities do better to protect ourselves as well as our loved ones. I believe BC should be a place where everyone can build a good life, where you can find an affordable home and you can feel safe in your community, where you can find a family doctor, where you can access the services you need when you need them. Also where we act on climate change and we build a sustainable economy that leaves nobody behind. That's the British Columbia we want, and I'm optimistic we're on the right path. By building preventative infrastructure today, before disaster strikes, we're building a stronger and more secure tomorrow. Thank you.
I almost forgot that this was part of my duties today, is to introduce Jen Ford, President of the Union of BC Municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Premier, for this incredible announcement today. We are so grateful for the work in community emergency preparedness. All local governments have been asking for information that we can share with our community members so that people can take ownership of their own preparedness plans and be ready for what's coming. We know that climate change is here, and we also know that wildfires and floods do not respect the municipal boundaries. They do travel across regions. Regional districts are looking to improve our adaptation infrastructure, and this funding will help us do that. We're very, very grateful for this tool of information and Climate BC, and we look forward to using this tool and learning from it together with the province. Thank you very much.
We have a lot of work ahead of us, but even as we do the work to drive down greenhouse gas emissions through our Clean BC strategy, we also know that we have to be prepared for the impacts that have already arrived and that will continue to hit British Columbia. I want to thank the Union BC Municipalities for their partnership in helping us deliver these critical funds. And I will now pass it on over to Tim, who will be taking any of your questions. Wait, moderating the questions. He won't actually be taking them himself.
I mean, we can make it a stand-up. So yeah, happy 4-day work week, but jammed in with 5 days worth of work. So we'll do one question, one follow-up. For those on the line, star 1 to get into the queue. We'll start with the people in the room. And then also, because we're not going to be using the system microphone here, there will be a floating mic going around. So the first question goes to Richard Zussman, Global News.
Premier, for you, hoping you can just give us a sense of what this mental health plan that went to Treasury Board last week looks like. What sort of investment are you planning on making? How quickly are you planning on doing it? And what are the fundamental problems you are trying to fix here in terms of treatment and support in BC's mental health system?
Well, our government has been working on issues of mental health and addiction since swearing in 5 years ago now. Establishing the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction and bringing together all of the patchwork of mental health and addiction services such as they existed under the previous government. That work continues today. We continue to do that work for a number of reasons. One is the toxic drug crisis. The drugs have never been more toxic. To stop the deaths, keep people alive, get them the opportunity to get into treatment. Also, a lot of people coming out of the pandemic, seeing in their downtown cores, people struggling with mental health and addiction. It's an issue around public safety, absolutely, but also for many people, an issue around compassion. So we're going to continue that incredibly important work as a government. I certainly look forward to having, I know people are keen to hear about the budget, and it's coming in 7 days, and I look forward to having more to say about that coming soon. but I know as well that this is an absolutely vital issue for British Columbians, that it is for me. It was something I talked about through the leadership campaign, and before that as Attorney General, and now as the Premier of the province. And I know it's a priority for British Columbians as well.
One of the challenges with any of these big investments is staffing. You're seeing it in all facets of life in British Columbia. How do you ensure that there will be enough frontline workers, psychiatrists, people to work in treatment centers to ensure that whatever plan you do put in place actually has the staff there to support the people that need the services?
Well, it's absolutely vital that across our medical health system, and this isn't exclusive to mental health and addiction, that we have the people to deliver care across the province when people need it. And we've seen that in everything from family doctors to nurses and health science professionals. It's certainly a case in mental health and addiction care, including areas of work like social workers and addictions counselors. So you see a couple of key responses from our government. First, around the health human resources strategy and the skills training pieces that we're putting in place to make sure that people are trained up, not just in the healthcare sector, but across our economy. As we're seeing a very low unemployment rate and demand for skilled workers in a number of different sectors going forward. But the second piece is for those workers to have ways in which to address key issues that we're seeing in communities. So when we announced the Complex Care Housing Initiative, for example, providing those additional healthcare workers from health authorities directly in BC housing facilities to provide mental health and addiction support, critically important. Making sure we have those skilled workers in place is vital, not just in healthcare. We're going to continue that work.
Next question goes to the person who has the microphone. It's Katie DeRosa.
Thank you, Premier. Last week you said that you agreed 100% with Kevin Falcon's plan around expanding mental health treatment, and the details of the plan that have been released are somewhat similar to Kevin Falcon's plan. So is that a coincidence, or is someone copying one or the other, or can you speak to any of the similarities that might be there?
Well, Katie, our plan around mental health and addiction was released 5 years ago. That we were prioritizing mental health and addiction as part of the healthcare system, and we've been working on it since then. And it's important to recognize a couple of things. One is we were inheriting a mental health and addiction system that had been hit badly by cuts under the BC Liberals. We saw those cuts to health authorities, and we saw their ideology around this, that whatever the human cost, it was seen as somehow appropriate governance to cut back on those vital supports in communities. So I was surprised, and I'm going to say I was happily surprised to see the BC Liberals come out with their proposal to build a strong public healthcare system around mental health and addiction. I think that's great news. I don't believe that addiction and mental health, the struggles that people are having, should be a partisan issue. And I was very glad to see the BC Liberals come on side and to shift their position in that way. And I think that the more that we can work together across the legislature to make sure that every concerns in every region of the province are heard, that we're able to work together to deliver, including as we did on the all-party committee related to mental health and addiction. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's overdose prevention sites, safe supply, about keeping people alive, to get in treatment, whatever the intervention is to keep people alive, we're going to try it. But the goal is always to get people into treatment, to get them the opportunity to restart their lives. The fact that we have alignment on that with the BC Liberals across the aisle is very good news.
Yes, as a follow-up, the Greens and the Association of Psychologists have asked for psychological counseling to be covered under MSP. Is that something you agree with, and will it be in the budget?
From the very first day of our government under the then Premier Horgan, and it certainly continues today, it has the support of our caucus, it has the support of our cabinet, it has the support of me as Premier. We believe that mental health services are part of our public healthcare system. And the most recent example I can give of that is when we were working with the federal government, when we went to Ottawa to meet face-to-face with ministers, with the Prime Minister. We asked them, we said, be good partners with us in the public healthcare system and help us make sure that mental health and addiction services are included in your healthcare funding announcement. The healthcare funding announcement came. It was not as fiscally robust as we were hoping for in British Columbia. The good news is it continues the funding it continues funding for the services that British Columbians depend on, but the funding for expansions into mental health and addictions, for example, home care and other areas that we were hoping to have a strong federal partner on, we're not there in the same way that we had hoped. So we are going to continue the work as a province. We're going to continue pushing the federal government on these important things. But the core of it, that we believe that mental health and addiction services are part of our public healthcare system, and our work to expand those services to make them more available for British Columbians will continue.
Great. Next question goes to Lisa Yuzda, News 1130.
Hi, Premier. We're doing another story about another family who's having a baby who is having their rent jacked up. This one, it's within the rules, but they've said they're considering these babies as adults. Is there anything more you can do to help young families? It's hard enough when you have a baby to get a place to rent. There's a lot of people who don't want small children. So is there anything you can do in the budget or within policy to help families in these situations that are having the rent jacked up when they get pregnant or have a baby?
I'd love some more details about that situation and to see if there's an opportunity for us to address it through appropriate reform. One of the key changes that we made around the strata rules was to stop the eviction of people having children in a strata that lived in a 19 plus strata. We eliminated that change. And the reason is young families need support. We believe really strongly that young families need support around certainly childcare. You've seen our work on that, but also housing. Finding affordable housing, especially if you're thinking about growing a family and making the decision about expanding your family to add a child to your life as parents. This is one of the biggest decisions you can make. It shouldn't be because you might lose your housing or your rent might increase dramatically. So we're going to be standing with those families. We're going to be supporting those families on the specific issue of the family facing the 55 plus strata change and being threatened with eviction. We're going to do the work necessary to identify what the options are at the provincial level to respond to that, to support them and families that may be in similar situations. And on this issue of rent increase tied to having a baby, I'm not familiar with how that would work under the residential tenancy branch, so I'm happy to have a look at that specific situation because we do have very clear rent increase guidelines and they are not dependent on family size. There's a fixed percentage that rents are allowed to be increased in British Columbia, and we've been holding the line on those because we know that renters are struggling. We're also looking for other ways to support both renters and landlords because people who provide housing are critically important, and we know that many renters are struggling with affordability right now.
So this is with babies then being considered as adults, so being treated as like a full job having adult. So do you think that there is something that could be done legally that could, I guess, alter what a personhood is in some way, but saying that, that a baby is not a full tenant. So when you're renting, you cannot treat a baby as if you have a new roommate in that home. Is that a possibility, or is that something that you just can't answer at this point?
The children at our house, and we love them very much. We don't see them as sort of taking a job. We see them as sometimes creating additional work around the house from time to time. But they definitely pay us back in love and joy in different ways. It seems strange to me that that would be the case under our tenancy rules. I'm happy to have a look at the policy. I'll work with the housing minister and certainly with that affected family to find out how the rules are being applied there to address that.
Next question is Binder Sajjan, CTV.
Thank you for the enthusiasm. Premier, I just wanted to ask you, I've got to make the question good. So you've got a funding announcement here today. I know there have been several over the past couple of weeks. This reported $1 billion for a mental health plan, $500 million in a housing plan, $2 billion in affordability measures since the fall, I think. So I'm just wondering, of the $5.7 billion surplus that we heard about at the last update, how much of that has been spent as of today, and what is your goal in terms of spending it by the end of March?
Well, British Columbians should know that through careful work and important decisions through the pandemic, our economy is one of the strongest in Canada, coming back from a remarkably trying economic time when literally major sectors of our economy were closed. We're proud of that. We're very glad to see that the work by all British Columbians through the pandemic, and certainly the supports provided by our government and our partners, the federal government, have helped ensure BC's economy is in a good place, to the point that we have a surplus this year financially. But I think what you see in today's announcement, and what I'm hopeful you see, is that our government believes that there are other deficits other than just fiscal when we're talking about the future of the province. So when we announced the $1 billion for municipalities for critical infrastructure, I am sure that there were families across the province last weekend, through the long weekend, that were lined up at a community center, were lined up at a community pool, were struggling with an unpaved road, were concerned about water supply issues. That is a deficit too. And so making sure that we're putting the resources into our communities to make them stronger helps pay off those deficits that were accumulated over many, many years. Today's announcement, $180 million for municipalities, that's going to go out over the next 2 years through UBCM to make sure that we are acting before disaster strikes. That when we build a dike to prevent flooding, all of the misery that we avoid, all of the government spending that we avoid, when we make sure that volunteer firefighters have the tools they need, they're able to intervene quickly to put out a fire so it doesn't spread in a small, rural, or remote community. The economic savings are significant. The impacts on employment are significant because the forestry industry is allowed to continue, but also people who live in more remote areas feel safer. Putting resources when we have the ability to do that now is important. There are people who say that we shouldn't be doing this, that now is the time to pull back. Maybe we should not be putting resources into disaster prevention. Maybe we shouldn't be putting resources into investing in municipal infrastructure for fast-growing communities. That would be a difference politically between perhaps us and the other party, the BC Liberals. But our government believes strongly that we should be supporting communities, that we should be investing in addressing these deficits that could lead to greater costs down the road or make communities less livable. For British Columbians, we think our livability is one of our big advantages here in BC, and we're going to continue investing in our province.
Okay, sometimes you say follow-up. Okay, I just wanted to ask you also.
As if Tim would say no to a follow-up after that introduction, right?
The new inflation numbers are out. At the same time, we're hearing about City of Surrey residents could be facing a 17.5% property tax increase. I know that, you're not the mayor of Surrey, but is that concerning for you? Would you be willing to maybe, put out some sort of relief measures for Surrey residents if there was a 17.5% property tax increase? And just a follow-up question on the healthcare, just wondering if you can tell us where those talks are at, because you mentioned it didn't quite meet what you're looking at.
Sure. For the City of Surrey, I know that there are lots of families struggling with rising costs. It could be groceries, it could be costs related to housing, and I'm sure for them very concerning to hear news from the municipal government about potential property tax increases. As a provincial government, we're going to continue to stand with the people of Surrey to make sure that we're supporting them however we can with the costs of daily life. And in the specific issue of policing, our job is very clear. We are going to make sure that when someone in Surrey dials 911 when they need a police officer to respond, that regardless of the plan of the City Council, whether to go to Surrey Police Service or back to the RCMP, that there's a police officer that responds to that call. Minister Farnworth, the Public Safety Minister, is focused on that. I'm focused on that as Premier. Whatever the plans are of the municipality, that police officer responds to that resident, that public safety is protected in the City of Surrey. We will continue to work with the City of Surrey staff, with the Mayor and Council, to make sure that that public safety is protected in terms of decisions around whether to go forward with the Surrey Police Service or go back to the RCMP. The decision that will be made by Surrey City Council, that'll be a local matter. For our government, public safety and supporting people with the cost of daily life will remain a priority. On the issue of healthcare negotiations, I don't have any update from when we met with the federal ministers. Our our public service is working with public service on the federal side to, as quickly as possible, work out our what's called a bilateral deal between our province and the federal government on the additional funding that is coming forward. And I look forward to have more to say in the weeks to come.
Okay, I'll go very monotone this time around. Next question, Andrew McLeod, Latai.
Wow. Wow. Tough.
I'm just giving you the stink eye over here. Okay, okay.
I've lost the spirit. I don't know if I can even ask. So, Premier, in question period, it came up about LNG proposals, and I understood your answer to be it's complicated. So I'm, of course, going to ask you to simplify. Is it possible to approve more LNG projects and hit our emission targets?
There are 3 LNG projects, as I understand it, that are either in the environmental assessment process or on the verge of it. The Niska Seislisms project, the bunkering Port of Vancouver, the Tilbury project, and the Cedar project that the Haisla First Nation are bringing forward. The statutory decision makers on those are the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, Minister Osborne and Minister Heyman. For 2 of those projects, they're currently in front of the statutory decision makers, so we're limited in what we could say. For the 3rd project, it's on the verge of going into the environmental assessment project, from what I understand. We've been clear, though, from the beginning of our government that we have key conditions around additional LNG projects. And one of them is that they need to fit within our emissions plan, our Clean BC emissions targets. And that hasn't changed. We're going to continue to work with project proponents to make sure that, that they're within our carbon budget. And that's critically important work for us to do. The other piece is around LNG, is that we want to make sure that, unlike some governments, that we are moving towards a clean energy future here in British Columbia. We believe strongly that British Columbia should be leading the way on, for example, clean hydrogen, on firm, clean electricity, that these are competitive advantages for us that come from the establishment of Ballard Power in Burnaby in the 90s. And the fact that we're blessed with just remarkable resources for hydro generation in our province. So we're going to be recognizing that there is ultimately for fossil fuels a movement internationally away from them to respond to carbon pollution and towards innovative technologies like hydrogen and better use of firm electricity, hydro resources. These are big advantages for BC. And we're going to be doing everything we can to take advantage of those trends. So we're building an economy not just for today, but also for the future as well.
Yeah, and how much of a difference does Indigenous involvement in the projects that are proposed make? As you know, you'll hear if the government says no, there'll be people will say things around like, reconciliation is dead, or UNDRIP's a gimmick, that kind of thing. So how much of a layer does the Indigenous involvement in those projects add?
I've met with a number of project proponents across different sectors, and it includes mining project proponents, LNG proponents, hydrogen project proponents, forestry proponents, and the message to all of them is the same. The days in which major economic projects on the land move forward without First Nations participation are over. We have had very clear court decisions that tell us in British Columbia, and frankly, something that our governments over time should have already known, which is that Indigenous people are key partners in resource development in our province. So when you see us move forward on any file related to resources and land, we will be doing so in partnership with First Nations, and my communication to industry proponents is that they also need to do that work as well, and we're going to support them in doing that work. On occasion, it is harder to go that route. And on some occasions, it really can accelerate things if they've been working in partnership for a while with the nations. But it can lead to really remarkable outcomes like we saw with Blueberry River First Nations and the Treaty 8 First Nations about balancing both resource interests for today as well as protecting the land for future generations. This is challenging work, it's important work, but we will do it in partnership with First Nations on every resource project that comes forward, and that's been our message to industry as well.
Great. Next question goes to Wolf Deppner, Black Press.
Thank you for taking my question. Earlier today, the House Leader of the BC Greens and the BC Liberals criticized your government for the handling of the legislative agenda on Thursday. They lamented the lack of substantive legislation. And they essentially argued that the lack of substantive legislation coupled with other procedural issues essentially amount to a disrespect of the institution, of the legislature, and of the democratic process generally. What's your response to their argument that essentially your government is disrespecting this institution and democracy generally by not bringing forward substantive legislation at this stage?
Well, we have introduced really important legislation across an array of sectors, both in the previous legislative session and in this session, and there's more legislation to come. We've got the budget coming in just 7 days, and I suspect very much that the same members right now that for some reason have not been asking questions or speaking to the bills that have been introduced. That's their prerogative. And absolutely, their decision as the opposition parties in the House. But for us, we'll remain focused on the priorities of British Columbians, on delivering for them on a number of critical issues, some of which involve legislation, and we'll be having those debates in the House. I am very proud of the work that we've done through the legislative sessions as Premier, and even before then, under Premier Horgan. We have had an ambitious legislative agenda, and that is not going to change because British Columbians want us to take action on public safety, making sure their communities are safer. They want us to take action on housing to address affordability around housing. They want to make sure that our healthcare system is working for everybody and that we're building a strong economy for generations to come that works for everybody and helping with the costs of everyday life. So we're going to continue to do that work. And I look forward to the debates in the House, as I always do, as I did in question period just today.
Yeah, thank you for taking the follow-up. You talked about healthcare dollars from the federal government for several weeks, if not months now. But another outstanding issue is the question of federal support for communities that have been hit by flooding, by fires, and so on. And a good chunk of that money is still waiting. What, if any, update can you offer on that? And how much, sort of a second part of that question, how much additional pressure do you plan to put on Ottawa to get some of this additional funding, which is in the excess of, I'm just going to, about $1 billion plus, if not more?
Well, I'll take the opportunity to certainly express appreciation to the federal government for making commitments to our government and to the people of the Fraser Valley following the historic atmospheric river impacts that washed out entire highways, and also express my appreciation to the many road builders and the people who worked around the clock to get those highways back open in record time. Remarkable work. It required that four government cooperation, the federal government committing around funding and assisting with permits, the provincial government around implementation, the local governments around supporting that work, and First Nations governments in stepping up to support it as well. So I don't have any indication, and I've to date we've been very happy with the federal government's support for recovery in the Fraser Valley. And we're going to continue to partner with them on that important work. This money that we're announcing today, this $180 million for local communities, could potentially match up with federally announced funding for similar initiatives around responding to and preventing climate change impacts. So I was at Squaw First Nation out at Chilliwack doing an announcement with Minister Ma, $5 million, which matched up with federal funding, which matched up with Chilliwack local government planning funding to build a dike to protect from flooding in that area. That kind of multi-government cooperation is certainly what I expect, and happily what I've seen as well, and what our government has seen as well from the federal government and local governments.
Premier, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned your experience with forest fires. Obviously, the funding that you announced today provides money for building dikes, tsunami evacuation centers. But one thing that was recommended in a 2017 government report was prescribed burning for forests. You've mentioned protecting old growth, bringing First Nations to the table in terms of land management decisions. But some experts are saying that, the government still isn't doing enough to make fires fireproof, so to say, through prescribed burning and other measures. What do you say to that? And is that something that you plan to institute moving forward?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So last week, I was really proud to stand with the First Nations Forestry Council and with Gary Merkel, a recognized international expert on forestry, around an announcement related to accelerating our old growth plan. Part of that announcement, it wasn't the one that stole the spotlight, but part of that announcement was around support related to prescribed burning and culturally related burning that is part of land management, around Indigenous land management, that helps protect communities from forest fire and deals with the debris that builds up in the woods. So that work is, I'm proud to say and happy to say, underway. And it's happening through the Ministry of Forests, and it was part of our announcement last week. It is part of our emergency management, absolutely not part of this announcement today, though.
For sure. And then just on emergency preparedness and rebuilding after events such as what happened in Lytton. Lytton is still rebuilding over 2 years after the forest fire that destroyed the town, and a lot of residents are saying they still haven't seen the $77 million promised by the federal government, and are still waiting for homes to be rebuilt, for stores to rebuild. What would you say to the people of Lytton, and what help is the province providing to the town and its residents?
Well, I think the fire in Lytton represented, not just for British Columbians, but for Canadians and in fact, people around the world, the impacts of climate change and just a remarkable tragedy for the people who live there. An entire village burning down shortly after setting a record for the highest temperature in history. Our government has been working with the local government in Lytton, the regional district, to clear the site when a whole village burns down. It leaves a lot of contamination in the ashes to make sure that it's safe for rebuilding. This is also an area where there has been human habitation for, well, since time immemorial. So there are very significant Indigenous sites in the area as well, which have to be worked through. As well, we've had a patchwork of private insurance as well as federal commitments around support. We want the private insurance companies to pay their share, not to let them off the hook in terms of supporting residents. So it has been a challenging rebuilding process. And I might invite, I don't know if you have any, I'll invite Minister Ma to give any further updates that she may have.
So just want to, oh, sorry, give me a second. My heels were falling off there. I just want to reiterate what the Premier has said, what the village of Lytton has gone through and the surrounding communities, because it wasn't just the village of Lytton, it was also the village, it was the Lytton community, which includes a lot of First Nations communities as well. What they went through is just extraordinary, has gone through enormous hardship as well. The recovery is being led by the village of Lytton. They have a mayor and council that was elected shortly, well, just last year in October, November. I met with Mayor Denise O'Connor just last month. Her team is incredibly committed to seeing this work go forward. From the province's perspective, we have been providing supports to the greatest extent possible while still respecting the reality that the recovery of the village of Lytton must be led by the community. The spirit, the heart, the soul of what it means to be the village of Lytton, it can't be reproduced off the side of someone's desk here in Victoria. It needs to be led by community. And I'm pleased to see some progress made there. A lot of the materials have been cleared from the burnt materials have been cleared from the village. They are undergoing significant archaeological work right now, archaeological screening. We're expecting the first report of the archaeological screening work that's been done in 2022 to be brought forward to the ARC branch shortly. And from there, we'll be able to, well, not so much us, but the Village of Lytton will be able to glean information that will help set the path forward for them on that work. Significant funding has been provided from the province to the Village of Lytton. They're currently working to hire recovery managers to help lead this work. It has been a challenge, absolutely. And because of those challenges, we will continue to be there to support them through this challenging time and through to recovery.
Great. We're going to go to our last question, which is on the phone. Mike Hager, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is for the Premier or Mr. Ma. When my colleague Justin Hunter checked in 3 months ago, the government had only paid out about $10 million in disaster financial assistance to Princeton, Merritt, and Abbotsford, but they estimated repairs to cost more than $1 billion. And then on top of that, Abbotsford Council's presented a plan to your government for a $2.8 billion fix for the Sumas River dike. Can you just weigh in on how your government has done in terms of doling out assistance to recover so far? And, you know, that the biggest ticket item is that dike. Where are you going with that plan?
So disaster financial assistance, for context, is a program that public, I'm going to use the word stakeholders, but really local governments and private individuals can apply to provide some financial assistance in the wake of a disaster. In the atmospheric river events of 2021, what we experienced as a province was truly unprecedented. And the number of disaster financial assistance applications was also unprecedented, about 2,100 applications for disaster financial assistance from that event as well. There have been, I would say I would not be satisfied to have the speed at which we process those applications be repeated in the future. It speaks to the importance of modernizing that program, and that is work that we're going to be doing. Maybe I'll elaborate on that as well. Disaster financial assistance up until the atmospheric river events and up until right now still, it is largely a paper-based process. And so the reality of the processing of those applications is people transcribing faxes into the database manually. With the incredible influx of disaster financial assistance applications, the EMBC, which was EMCR before it became EMCR, hired significant numbers of staff to help with that, but it's still a very paper-based process. And so that's, again, speaks to the importance of modernizing it, and that's the work that we're going to be doing ahead, in the months ahead.
Mike, do you have a quick follow-up?
Always. BC's asked Ottawa for about $5 billion to help rebuild. I gather Minister Blair's in town tomorrow. How much of that has come in so far, and what do you tell those in communities who are still waiting for money?
So the province is working with communities on recovery. Going back to the DFA, the Disaster Financial Assistance Program, and I'm sorry, I'm a new minister, so you're going to have to bear with me as I kind of go through my brain as in terms of how I answer these questions. I realize that I probably missed a few of your questions earlier. Going back to disaster financial assistance, I'll also say that as of today, we have successfully processed well over 99% of all of those applications. But DFA is only part of the funding that communities require for recovery, and only part of the funding that the province invests in recovery as well. So as you know, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has been working very hard to recover highways, Highway 8, Highway 5, Highway 1, and that work is happening. The Ministry of Agriculture has also been working with the federal government on a number of different recovery programs, the Agri-Stability Program as an example, but many more is there as well. We're feeling good about the partnership that we have with the federal government. And while we are working with the federal government, we are also working with communities on the ground. So the CEPF funding that we announced weeks prior, that provided funding for 49 additional climate mitigation projects. The funding that we have provided to Squaw First Nation and Shwe Village to provide riprap, slope stability, in order to support their work on a dike. And we are absolutely working with municipalities like Abbotsford as well to understand the risks to that floodplain and develop a comprehensive strategy that we can work across all levels of government, including First Nations and the federal government as well. So we're working well and more to do. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for coming to our TED Talk. I'm going to have you folks stand up in the front for a quick photo.